Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Lisa K. Solomon and Liz Gerber. Thanks for joining us. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 350 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to that channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. Now for some introductions. Lisa K. Solomon brings over 2 decades of strategic foresight and futures and design thinking to education and civic fellowship. Currently a lecturer and the Futurist in residence at the Stanford D.school, Lisa teaches popular classes like Inventing the Future and View from the Future. Lisa helped start and co-host the National Association of Independent Schools podcast, New View EDU, for school leaders, and works extensively with K-12 administrators and educators. She is the creative force and co-founder of award-winning civic venture initiatives like Vote by Design Presidential Edition, the team's All Vote No Play civic programming for student athletes, and The Future's Happening Democracy Edition. Lisa co-authored the best-selling books Moments of Impact, How to Design Strategic Conversations That Accelerate Change, and Design a Better Business, New Tools, Skills, and Mindset and Strategy for Innovation. And she created the popular LinkedIn learning class, Leader as Futurist. Joining her is a huge fan favorite, Liz Gerber, a professor of mechanical engineering and communication studies at Northwestern University, just right out the window here, co-director of the Center for Human Computer Interaction and Design, co-director of the Delta Lab, and faculty founder of Design for America. Her research focuses on artificial intelligence and the future of work, and for more than 2 decades, she has consulted widely with for-profit and nonprofit organizations on innovation and product development. She is the host of an incredible podcast called Technical Difficulties, centered on the stories of female leaders in tech and design. You have to tune in. And now let's welcome Lisa K. Solomon and Liz Gerber to FAN.
What a delightful introduction, and welcome to Lisa. Thanks for coming, zooming into our Chicago podcast or webinar. So thrilled to have you all the way in from California. Thank you. Lisa, the question I've been wanting to ask you, I wanted to start off with, is you're a futurist. So when I think of futurist, I go back to my childhood days. I'm in the Jetsons. I'm thinking about 3D printed food. I'm thinking about jetpacks, flying cars, vertical cities. Is that what you do? You think of those things? What do you do, Lisa?
I mean, sort of. Yes, we'll get to that. First, I want to say a huge thank you, Liz, for doing this. It's such an honor to be in conversation with you. I always learn something. I know we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to cover some fun territory. And Lonnie, thank you so much for what you are doing with FAN and for bringing new and important ideas to the world, freely available. I think in many ways it is a great embodiment of what we're going to talk about tonight, this idea of imagining new futures and then making choices to bring them to life. So we're going to cover a lot of ground. Starting with your question, yes, Liz, the Jetsons, our favorite futures family from 1962 that had flying cars and moving sidewalks and George talking to Mr. Spacely on his watch, and the future of Skype, and Jane pressing a button to get meals, basically most of our everyday today. And what I love about that example is that, first of all, it's sticky. I think even if you were not around in the 60s, I wasn't yet around, it's still very memorable because it's a story told in a very concrete, immersive way, world building, even though it's pop culture building style, and it wasn't realistic, but it really put us in that mode. But it stretched imagination. It took early signs of technology. If we remember in 1962, we were actually in a moment where we were feeling bright about the future. In that context, historically, there was the emergence of the middle class. We had a very charismatic young president. We had mod fashion colors. And as a result, one of the most popular shows was a utopic view of the future that stretched imagination. Now, none of that was feasible at that moment in time. But if you think about how just putting that narrative out of a totally just fantastic future inspired inventors, tinkerers. It brought it to life, something to shoot for. So I think it is a great example of imagination pulling us towards a kind of future that we might want to be a part of. And that very much underlies pretty much all of my classes and programs.
Great. Okay, so in Jetsons, thank you for putting us there. They're really focused on technology. My understanding of your interest in future, you're not thinking about the future smartwatch or how we're going to clean our homes with robotics. You're thinking about futures of in a different space. Can you describe what kind of futures you like to think about?
Yeah. And I would say forces like emerging technology are definitely a part of that. And there are experts that really understand these individual technologies and can identify the trajectory of where they're going and disruption points and what might help get to the next level of an incarnation of any one of those, which tends to be, and as we know in technology, faster, cheaper, more available, in part because of the data and all of the technology. So there are a lot of experts that are forecasting that. That is definitely not my core expertise. What I try to do is help leaders and learners of all ages, first of all, learn how to anticipate where those might be going by examining trends, by looking at external forces. So this ability to anticipate is a muscle I think we can all flex. I also help our students and leaders that I work with use some of those trends that they're spotting to then imagine leaps, imagine how they might work together. Again, there's that applied imagination, and then try to make decisions about how they might adopt today in order to first bring about those futures that they'd like to see come to life, and really, at the very least, inoculate us against futures that we don't want to see to life. And the point of all this, and what gets me excited every day, is to help more people feel like they have agency in making choices to shape those futures. These days, Liz, listen, it's tough to see the news coming at us all of the time. It is not maybe how we're feeling in those early 60s about a rosy moment. It can feel like the future's happening to us. That's a
Yeah.
very hard place to be, and that's certainly hard place to be creative. And the work that you do and really helping young innovators develop skills to have a social impact, that can be hard when you're feeling like on the back foot. So what we're trying to do is really break down these mindsets and skill sets and frameworks for taking in the complexity and pausing to say, wait a minute, what does this mean? What might change it to be for the better? What choice do I want to make to avoid? To, again, help people feel like that they don't have to have the future happen to them.
Yeah. So many things I want to build off of that you said, Lisa. One is there's a sense of agency you're talking about here, which is I could sit back and say, I'm too busy. Day to day is just taking up I got to do my day to day. And further, I don't have agency. I don't have time. Like, talk to me about, and maybe you can offer a concrete example of how in the world do people have time? Like just practical number of hours in the day. How do we have time and how do we scope something doable? And I'd love if you could give a concrete example of how this actually might happen with, somebody like me. I'm busy. I've got a day job. I've got kids. I've got a whole life. I've got family to take care of. What does this actually look like? How might I do
Yeah.
this?
It's such a great question. And I will say that Futures has been around for a long time. I mean, actually, if we go into the Wayback Machine and we even look at the super early days of communication to one another, we see cave drawings of like animals that, I think they're trying to say like that will eat you, right? The caves of Glasgow, right? Trying to communicate a future that they don't want. So I want to say that different practices of futures have been around for a long time. I think they got more popular in the 50s. Certainly from a corporate standpoint, when the Rand Corporation used a type of futures thinking called scenario planning to help model out what a post-World War II might look like, and how do we prepare not for a single future, but for multiple futures. And then, more recently, I think it's becoming much more widespread. I will say that us scenario planners and futurists got very popular in March of 2020 when we were all suddenly hit with a global pandemic that disrupted everything. And of course, everybody wanted to know how the future might unfold and why. And I think that's opened up an appetite for, getting back to your question, making time for it. We don't have
So
time.
I have to know, I have to quickly
Yes.
ask, I have to drill down. Does
Yes.
something bad have to happen for us to ignite futurist thinking? Like, or does there have to be some kind of travesty
Oh my
or
gosh.
I have so many questions, but that
I
I
know
need to ask on
it's
that.
no, it's such an awesome question.
Yeah.
And I think unfortunately that is the way we're wired.
Yeah.
Is like when we're hit with this big disruptive moment and we think, oh no, what are my options? And I just want to say to everybody listening, that is not the time to practice futures thinking for the first time, right? We do not do our most imaginative, generative thinking in the moment of a crisis. We just don't, right? So I think the time, getting back to your question, how do we make time? It takes leadership to say it matters for us to take a longer view, even when we feel like time compression and there's pressure on us to deliver and there's more things distracting us, Bings and Slack and email and text, right? It is a discipline to carve out to say, wait a minute, if we feel responsible for the choices that we make, that we want them to have a long-term impact, we can't accidentally get our path towards that area. And we definitely don't want to do that when we are feeling at our back on our heels, which again gets us back to where we started, which is how do we foster integrated imagination as part of our strategic planning process? And I will say, right, many of us here, I know we have different audiences of parents that might be thinking about the future for their families and their kids, school leaders that do yearly planning and 5-year plans, business leaders. We all do futures thinking. We just tend to do it in a very linear way. And I think what I'm suggesting and the kinds of classes that I teach are to supplement the way we naturally think about the future, which is a linear path of where we are today, to instead imagine where we want to be and then backcast back, or to try to
wait, define backcast. What does that
yes.
mean?
So that's a great question. Thank you. Thank you. Our friend Bob Sutton will be very happy. No jargon monoxide. We'll be very happy about that.
Real words. What does backcasting mean?
So backcasting basically says, let's take a step back. If we tend to think about the future as an extension of today, then most of our imagination is limited to some variation of a linear path. But we know the future is not like that. It's filled with speed and surprise. And then we're like, oh my gosh, what happened, right? And that's not because we weren't capable of understanding it or that we needed to predict it, but we don't, again, open up our aperture to thinking about how the future really might unfold. And we can talk very specifically about some ways of doing that. And
can we get concrete for a moment? I think it will help if we get like it's maybe something you've done in your class or something you've been working on this fall, just so we can ground this.
Absolutely. So the core class that I teach, that I've been teaching at Stanford, is called Inventing the Future. And the whole premise of that class, we started it about 6 years ago. So before the pandemic, and when all of us opened up to imagining new futures. And the premise of that class was understanding that technology is becoming more and more powerful. How do we teach students, not can they build it, but should they build it? That longer term responsibility. And so every week we introduce students to very specific frameworks and ways of looking at the future. For example, one of my favorites is called the Futures Wheel. The Futures Implication Wheel basically says, let's start with something in plain sight. So maybe just the other day I was walking down, I see driverless cars. Driverless cars are going to be a part of our future. Can any of us predict exactly when or how? We can't, but we know it is, right? So there's many, many trends like that. What the Futures Wheel asks you to do is put driverless cars in the middle and say, look, if we believe that this is going to be an important part of our future, but we don't exactly know how or when, we could say, well, what is one implication of that? Well, one implication of more driverless cars is maybe accidents will go down. Well, that's a good thing, right? Max, it turns out humans tend to be buggier than the computers once they're dialed in. Well, if accidents go down, who cares about that? Well, insurance cares about that. They're thinking about that. Who else cares about that? Well, Organ donations care about that because if accidents go down, where are they going to get access from, unfortunately, fatalities, which is one of their largest source. So then we're dealing with a shortage potentially of where are we going to get organs? Now, what I love about that example is that we don't often think like driverless cars may lead to a surge in 3D printing of organ or a surge in demand of organ. It helps you think through just by saying what could happen next and what could happen next and what could happen next about how to unfold without judgment. Not like that would never happen because. So that's just one example. And what we do in that class and what I try to do in my work with leaders as well is to give these small ways of basically visiting the future. Because it turns out we tend to spend our days in the known, right? Oh, wait, that's a thing I got to do. Versus, wait a minute, what are the known unknowns? How do I research them? And what are the unknowns, right? How do I think about that? And so it's that third category where, again, we want to infuse and integrate some more imaginative ways of doing that. And sometimes, again, going back to your example, that could be find a story, a sci-fi story, and tell us what's interesting about a trend that's unfolding now that may play out in this way. I know last week, Liz, you had the opportunity to interview Carissa Carter and Scott Dorley on their wonderful new book, Assembling Tomorrow. One of the things I love about that book, my colleagues that wrote it are academic collector and creative director at the D.school, is that there are 20 short stories that allow you to visit the future with provocative questions that say, well, how do we feel about this?
Yes.
So again, these are very low-tech analog ways that allow us to really sense the future and see how the future might unfold so that we can shape the future.
So do you find that people have, you mentioned the future is not linear, not straight. How do you get people to develop multiple stories about the future? And that's part one. And part two is, do you find that people have a tendency either to be optimistic or pessimistic or both? Like, are there trends there? And how do you encourage people to come up with multiple stories and think about different outcomes?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It's actually how I open up my class.
Okay.
Two important questions. One is I ask, and again, I encourage just the audience to think about it now when I ask this question. I say, the future is blank.
Yeah.
And you can't believe the responses,
Yeah,
and
what kind of responses
from there, right? Like, yeah, I know this is where I wish the chat was open, right? The future is limitless. The future is now. The future is ours. The future is happening. The future is scary. The future is uncertain. What's interesting about that is that it suggests that we all carry around biases about the future that probably, right, like are a lens of how we take in information and how we make decisions, but we don't pause to think about it. So that's interesting. So here I am, I'm a leader. I think the future is bright and exciting, but the person that's working with me is really nervous and they're feeling a lot of uncertainty. From that, we're going to have a disconnect about how we take in information. So just giving a conceptual vocabulary is a really important part. The second thing I do with them on that first day is I actually ask that question, that very question that you asked, like, tell me, thinking a generation ahead, not a year ahead, but really pushing, flexing. Do you believe that the future is generally going to be, are you feeling more optimistic about the future or are you feeling more pessimistic about the future? And I literally have them line up. And what I'm trying to suggest there, and we have a conversation about it, is not you're right or you're wrong or I'm right. It's why are you seeing it that way? So, I mean, more than anything, I think futures is an approach to learning that I think is not optional anymore. And so that's a really juicy conversation that we do this kind of like one line of an axis. And then I say, okay, staying in that line, step forward if you think you have agency to shape the future, and step back if you think the future is going to happen to you. And again, we basically are creating this 2x2, and this comes from Stuart Candy, who's a very close colleague of mine, experiential futurist, who borrowed work from Fred Pollock, who is one of the grandfathers in many ways of articulating concepts of the future and how they inform society. So he wrote a book called Image of the Future, which really isolated this important point. And I think this can be a jumping point to some of our more concrete examples about our image of the future. If we individually, collectively, have an image of the future that's bright, right? Kind of again, going back to the Jetsons, then we are more likely to build towards that future. But if we
Mhm.
are walking around with a future that feels
Mhm.
in decline, that
Mhm.
feels pessimistic, what Pollock says, who is a Holocaust survivor, whose whole work was based on trying to understand how a society turned so dark. And
Yeah.
it was because the image of the future was dark that was given to them at that time in Germany. And he says the society will soon decay. And
Hmm.
so I think my work has been an important part of navigating an increasingly complex and dynamic world. But frankly, Liz, it has felt more urgent, right? As these
Mhm.
narratives of the future feel more despairing, feel more pessimistic, even dystopic.
Yeah.
I know we want to talk a little bit about some of the civic applications of this, but this is
Yeah.
what drives that work, right? It's really about helping more people feel agency and shaping a brighter future, feeling like an empowered voter, feeling
Mhm.
like they have the ability to be informed in
Mhm.
order to participate. And what I have learned over now 4 years of doing this work is that when we look at particularly young people and we say, why don't they vote? Why aren't they more involved? Are they apathetic? You know, you work with young people. I work with young people. They are not apathetic.
No, not at all.
They are under supported. They are under scaffold,
Correct.
right?
Underheard, undersupported. Yes.
The vote by design that Lonnie talked about earlier was a class that I created at Stanford ahead of the 2020 election that wanted to infuse design thinking principles of empathy and learning from each other and
Yeah.
experimenting with futures principles, visiting the future and checking them out. And I'll just give you a concrete example of how that.
How in the world did you think of that idea also? I've been dying to know. Been dying to know.
I mean, these things.
You're creative, you're imaginative. How can we even be 5% of what you
Oh,
are?
we
But
can do it.
we're gonna get to that.
We can all do it. I mean,
But
listen.
let's start with vote by design. What was it?
Okay, listen, there's a great word in Yiddish around like it's in your kishkas, like it's in your, but
Okay.
like you feel it and you're like, I gotta bring it, right? So that was it.
Okay.
So
Ishka is the word?
all right, kishkas, like in the like inner. So Liz,
Okay.
I'll let you in on a little secret since it's just you and I or what.
Yeah.
But the story is my very, very first job out of college was working on a political campaign. I was working for a Democratic senator from Pennsylvania. I'm a proud Philadelphia person. And at that time, I was
Where, what
21
neighborhood?
years
Let's just
old.
get specific, just in case we've got some
Okay,
Philly.
just in case I was out, I was born in Chestnut Hill, but I really grew up on the main line. If
Okay.
any of my Philly friends are listening, send me Wawa. You know I love it. I will love you forever. This Californian diaspora is dying to get back to the Wawa. Um, so,
Thank
uh, it was just a formative experience for me where I was a
you.
government
Okay.
major and I went out to try to help a candidate that I believed in.
Yeah.
And they sent me out to Pittsburgh, even though I'm from Philadelphia. And they said, listen, your job is to do two things. You got to help raise $7 million for this campaign in Pittsburgh. Don't do anything
Okay.
illegal. And the second thing they said was, and don't tell anyone you're from Philadelphia because people in
Yeah.
Pittsburgh don't really like Philadelphia. So just say you're,
Okay.
no, don't lie, but just say you're from outside. Anyway,
Yeah.
so all of that, and $7 million back when I was doing that in the early 90s is probably like $40 million now, right? We know. So
Yeah.
I share that seed because, again, from a futures perspective, that trend that these campaigns were driven by money has only gotten exponentially worse. So that was weighing on my mind, right? In 2019, when I started to conceive of this class, that was an external trend that was weighing on my mind.
That there was a lot of money
A lot
going.
of money, a lot of
Okay.
money to nowhere. Like, what else could we be doing with that money? And if we looked at young voter rates in particular, they were not improving. So it was more money, but no result, at least as a standpoint when it was reaching young voters. So, designers, before we solve the problem, we ask a different question.
Mhm.
So I said, like, what if they're not apathetic? Like, what if there's something else going on here that they're not making the connection between the opportunity to vote and what it means to be a voter?
Mhm.
And
Okay.
we know that like our trend is, we raise a lot of money so we can get famous people and commercials on airways to basically chastise people to vote or to try to cajole them to vote or to lecture them to vote. Find me a teenager, an 18-year-old that is like, I'm so glad I was lectured. I can't wait to vote. So I was like, what if we took a different approach? Instead of saying vote, vote, we said, hey, When you turn 18, you become a hiring manager. That's amazing. Like you might
Okay.
not have never had a job, but
Yeah.
you get to hire the most important position in the country, if not the world. Wow.
Great reef.
Right?
Yeah.
Great refresh. Like, so automatically from the beginning, power, status down, right? Lecturing down,
Yeah.
conversation not existent, right? Just
Yeah.
encouragement. And then I
Yeah.
said, well, what are you hiring for? So now I'm kind of like backing into a conversation. Do we understand what the job of the president is? And I'm not a
Ah,
salesperson, right? So we're like, okay, now we're having a conversation. Hey, there's a job description. Turns out it's in Article 2 of the Constitution. Let's go check it out. What does it say? And then we would say, well, what would make someone good at that job? What are the leadership qualities you're looking for? Do you want someone empathetic? Do you
mhm.
want someone charismatic? Do you want someone
Right.
that is a strong communicator? And all of a sudden,
Mhm.
in a very respectful way, we're having a dialogue, right? And then what kind of personal things are you looking for? Oh, we're learning across difference. And then so that's kind of framing and getting into a conversation. And then what we would do is we would show them debate clips. And they would now all of a sudden learn to be a critical listener. Wow, I didn't realize that that was important to me. I wouldn't have picked up on that. So we're practicing. That's this whole thing. We're practicing.
So you're not saying vote for candidate A or B. You're just saying get engaged, learn.
Get engaged, right? Think about it, but get engaged by understanding. And what I loved about it is that when we actually turn this online to make it what it is today, I worked a lot with civics teacher, and I had one great civics teacher from Georgia who said, I never really thought about it this way, that when kids turn 16, we don't say before you get your license, go memorize an engine.
Yeah.
They go drive, right? Go drive.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
this was an opportunity, go drive. But let me just quickly finish. I think the real kicker of the curricula
Yeah.
was we said, okay, once you've identified these leadership qualities, this is where the futures come in. So if that's the design part, taking a
Okay.
student-centered view on engaging in a conversation that they can see themselves in and
Mhm.
grow, we said, okay, now you've identified your leadership qualities. Let's fast forward to the future. What could happen? And we literally, Liz, I would just want to situate us. In 2019, we wrote with a couple of my colleagues about 5 different scenarios of the future. One was a pandemic of a flu-like virus that emanated out of China and took down the world economy, and there was no vaccination and no response to it. Another one was a scenario of a hacking election and how the president might respond. Another one was a scenario of dangerous militants that stormed a state capitol. And another one was on a drone in the Middle East. And I kid you not, this is 2019, before any of it happened. And we said, here's the situation. And they were beautiful. I actually printed one out. Like they were beautiful. They looked good. They looked
They
interesting.
look like they were official.
Official. And we said,
Okay.
now embodying the leadership qualities that you said that you cared about, make a speech to the American people responding to that. And so we would call that design prototyping. So what were
Yeah.
we doing? We were visiting the future in a concrete way.
Yeah.
And we had them try on what they cared about. And then we had a conversation about it. So all of a sudden, about 3 hours, we're having much more meaningful dialogue because of the ways that we've not only talked about the future, we have felt the future. And I think that's another big part of all of this futures thinking is that we are using design not just for our head, but to immerse ourselves because we know there's no data about the future, but there are feelings about them. And that is a kind of information that can be useful to all of us. So
Mm.
I want to share that. And if you allow me, because I think it's a great concrete example about then what got me into some of the student athlete work
Yeah.
is once the pandemic actually did hit, I said, well, we got to make this more available. And again, from a futures perspective, this was 2020. Things were heating up, and a lot of civics teachers, and maybe some of them are on this call, felt more and more uncomfortable talking about the election, right? Because of the external pressure that they were feeling. So if you think about it, what does the future need from us? It needs our students to be educated, engaged, informed. Hopefully that happens in school. What's happening from an external perspective? They're backing away. They're worried about the pressure. So we're having a disconnect there. So
I mean,
I
we were
felt,
worried to go outside, Lisa. I mean, just
yeah,
thinking back to that time, like there was
yeah,
this, yeah, there was not a lot of progressive forward thinking. It was, to your point, it was a feeling of like, I felt like I can't do anything. I can't leave my house. I can't
a
leave my
retrenchment,
bedroom,
right? Like the
right?
lack of agency of all agency.
Absolute lack of
Yeah.
agency. And it was a global experience of lack of agency. I mean,
Right.
unbelievable.
Right. So I think when something like this was more available, we partnered with Nearpod, and we had I ended up partnering with a lot of different civics organization and teachers.
What
We
is
ended up
Nearpod? Just to get that.
Nearpod was it was an ed tech. They were excited to help because I think we were all, if you remember, scrambling to figure out how to create immersive curricula.
Right. Zoom was not familiar to most people at that time. Yes.
No.
Yeah.
So then I just started to get it out. We started shrinking, making discussion guides again, just to get some of the basics in play to help people feel some kind of connection to how they might get involved. And I got a call in June of 2020 from a 6'8" basketball coach named Eric Reveneau, who may or may
And
not.
just for contrast, can you tell, if you're willing to share it publicly online, how tall you are?
Well, on a good
day.
On a good day, I'm 5'1".
Okay.
And on a good day. So yes, so there's a big difference there for all of our math teachers out there, right? And
there's nothing better than seeing you next to that coach. I can't lie. Because you are a powerhouse. It proves you don't.
I'm going to show you a picture because we gave it. We're getting so Coach Reveneau, he also, like me, became this accidental civic innovator. He was one of the coaches down at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, the heart of activity following the murder of George Floyd, protest, and he was trying to process what was happening with his team to support them. And a senior on his team named Malachi Rice said, well, if you all care about the future, who here is registered to vote? And nobody raised their hand, Liz.
On his team.
On his team. He was asked. And for Coach Rev, he thought, what am I doing? I'm probably the most important adult in their lives. I see them for 20 hours a week. I've never thought in my coaching career of several decades to ask them to vote. So he gets on Twitter and he says, on election day, we should not practice or play. We should give time to our athletes to vote. Hashtag all vote, no play. So I love that because I want to connect with that's thinking like a futurist, right? He's like, what could we do, right? I'm seeing that the way the future is happening is not the way I want it to be. I want to make a difference. What can I do? I can't change legislation. I can't wave a magic wand. I can use what's available to me. So I'm going to get on Twitter and I'm going to put out a new vision for the future, right? Let's take election day off. And then guess what happened, Liz?
What?
2,000 people signed the pledge. Like, he put out this proclamation and 2,000 or so athletes and coaches said, we're with you, Rev. Yes, we're with you. And then,
because they're a tight network, they know each other, and
they know each other. This makes sense. This is part of a future that's pulling us and calling us that we want to be a part of.
Awesome.
And then the student athlete committee that connects with the NCAA, which runs all of the student athlete, Division 1, 2, and 3. They said, listen, we want to make this an annual legislation. And so it passed unanimously. So here is this movement, this call for a different future.
Doesn't matter who you vote for, just vote.
We want you to vote, nonpartisan. We want to give you time to vote. We want to give you support. And so here's the call. Let me see if I can pull it up. This is a scary moment. So here he is, right? He's putting out this call on election day, right? He's changing the future. But then what happened was they were so excited. He called me up. He said, listen, I'm looking at all the civic material, Lisa, and I got to tell you, it's like, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's gobbledygook. We would say it's not well designed. It's not, and I have a short window with athletes, so I need a good designer and a good communicator to help me reach these athletes. So here it is. This is the picture I think I have. Here we are working together. So we spent.
There you are. There's the height. Thank you.
Yeah, the height thing. I really hope you're watching. We spent a year, that first year, developing what we called civic drills that were designed, right? Speaking athlete, informed by athlete. I recruited a student athlete of mine to create these short ways for athletes that we know, again, thinking like a futurist, what do we know about athletes? They are often some of the most influential people on campuses.
They're rock stars. I mean, at Northwestern, they're the rock stars. They're up there with Taylor Swift. Yeah.
Total rock stars. So, so we were basically lifting up their voices and supporting them. And Liz, this has turned into a national nonprofit called The Team that's now run by another wonderful coach, Coach Joe Kennedy. And just last week, we worked together and we hosted over 10,000 student athletes watching an all-star meeting with student athletes like Kansas Robinson from Northwestern, talk to WNBA players, listening from Governor Wes Moore, who was the former football player from Johns Hopkins, making connections, meeting them where they are, basically saying, look, as athletes, every day, you are working towards a purpose, you are bridging difference, you are getting better, you are overcoming disappointment. That is exactly what we need around the kinds of citizens in our communities. So that's why this work excites me so much, is because it's not just academic. It is really about shaping better futures. Literally, we touched 10,000 people. And my favorite part, one more detail, is that we did it in teams. We had 125 watch parties, and we delivered, thanks to our partners at Pizza to the Polls, over 1,000 pizzas. So it turns out, even though the future's changing, we all still like pizza. We're willing to gather around pizza.
Some things never
And
change.
that matters, right? That's important to know. So thanks for letting me tell those stories.
I'm going to ask you to tell one more story, because you have a brilliant way of, first of all, translating. I love that you use the word drills, because athletes do drills. So this is just a different kind of drill. So one, brilliance, kudos to you for translating the language from voting, what do you call it? Gobbledygook. I think that was your technical word, to like language. Yeah, that we can understand. And one thing I've always admired about your work is you are very good, you're very good about telling about your amazing work, but you're also really good at highlighting other people's work. And you introduced me to a term called bright spots. I went to a conference a couple months ago, and what I distinctly remember is walking into the room, and there were posters everywhere, and you had dubbed these bright spots. And the way it made me feel was, I walked into the room thinking, I'm not a civic activist. I'm not an organizer. I'm a designer, but I'm not a civic organizer. And when I walked out of there, and after I talked to many of the people who and shared their stories and heard about these bright spots, I thought, oh, maybe I am a civic designer. Actually, maybe I am. I just hadn't seen myself in that way. And one story that I would love for you to share, which is, I believe the organization is called Warm Cookies and the Revolution. Maybe you can fill it in for me. But they shared an interesting story that was also about how to get local community members engaged in civic conversations, especially people like me who didn't think of themselves as didn't identify as with a civic identity. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to kind of celebrate that bright spot in that story, because I think it's a beautiful story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liz, and thank you for coming. It was really an extraordinary gathering, and the work you're referring to is the Futures Happening that we hosted in April. That really was about celebrating multiple bright spots in order to shape better tomorrows. Look, we're like full on in the sprint to the election, right? I don't think there's many people that would say this is going awesome. I just feel great every time I get a political notice. I just feel like the future is bright. And so, I had these examples, Vote by Design, working with the team and student athletes, and seeing the power of framing different, not in a Pollyanna way, but in a way that pulled us toward a brighter future. And so I said, what better place than the D.school, where we flex skills of making and imagining with care about our future? What better place to bring people together to honor bright spots and imagine a better future together? So here, I'll just share my screen, because I think, show don't tell. So we really wanted to bring people together, and these were the core questions that really drove us to come together, right? Like, what if we looked at bright spots, to your point? What if we imagine more positive democracies? And I will say, Liz, I definitely got some non-believers that were like, Lisa, there's no time. Going back to your question, no time. We have urgency. We got to fix it. And I said, listen, if all we're doing is reacting, then all we're going to do is react. We also need something to look forward to. But as a designer, I couldn't go into fantasy land because I would lose people. I had to do it. So that really inspired me to, try to move people from this left side to the right side, and to do it in very practical ways. So, coming back to your question about Warm Cookies of the Revolution and Evan Weissman and this civic health club that he's created in Denver in the America West, he's really about meeting people where they are. And one of the many programs that he has is called the Huddle. And the Huddle is a civic opportunity to talk about stuff that matters in your community in a bar during the halftime of football shows or football games.
I love this. So
Right.
brilliant.
And it's like, listen, I know where you are. I'm coming to meet you. By the way,
Yeah.
who's building that stadium and who's going to get displaced from that stadium? And what happens when so he's not saying you got to vote and don't you know what's on the ballot?
And
No,
come to
he's
the
saying,
Civic Center.
yeah, I'm
No,
going to
he
where
goes to
you
the
are.
bar and starts chatting about the team, and then he gets into the
Yeah.
the um the stadium, and oh, who pays for the stadium? Oh, taxes pay for the stadium.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like that backing into like, how does the world really work? In the things you care about. You care about the stadium.
Yeah. And so, this is the Chinese version. He actually wrote a book to try to foster that called Vote Every Day. Okay.
And it's a
And
board book, which I
it's a
love.
board book. And he's like, you know what? How do we get people to think differently about the kind of ownership that they have? So he created this book, Vote Every Day, and it's really about
Yep.
our mindset shift
Love it.
about why don't we talk about owning our park benches and our this and our that? And here's what's great, Liz, as you said, like people came to this event that we had in April, changed. Their view of agency shifted and the relationship shifted. So we had a head of school that is now developing a K through 5 curricula based on this, right? Based on Vote Every Day. She didn't know about it before, but she's like, I'm going to
Uh,
take that and now I'm going to turn it into a curricula. We're going to make it a contest. We had athletes there. We had both student athletes and professional athletes. From that gathering, we had the WNBA player all-star, Nneka Ogwumike, who took over for LeBron James's More Than a Vote, which started again another act of imagination, civic imagination.
wow.
And she's now running it. And because she met Aaron Huey from Amplifier Art, they created an Amplifier Art campaign to get out the vote. Again, wouldn't have happened if you were not allowing people to imagine and build together.
Okay, can you just pause for a moment and say
Yes.
what the Amplifier Art program was amazing? Can you describe to people what that was? Because I thought it was a very interesting um, integration of graphic design, DIY, and civic engagement in a way I'd never conceived before.
Absolutely. So this came out of, understanding the power of art to shift our imagination.
Mhm.
And if you all remember in the Wayback Machine in the Obama, the very iconic Hope poster was created by an artist named Shepard Fairey.
Yeah.
And Aaron Huey, who is a multi-talented innovator and social impact entrepreneur, was like, how do we want to carry that forward? And so he has created a whole series of different events of iconic art and artists talking about climate, talking about our vote, talking about we the future. And I bet a lot of educators, would really resonate, and because they have it, they have those, and he made it freely available and a curricula. So again, we're reluctant to use art as a way in, imagination as a way in, but that's what's more memorable. And so it continues.
My
So
daughter, I didn't get to tell you this, but when I got home, I have a daughter at our local Evanston High School, and one of the projects was to create a political poster. And I have never seen my daughter so thrilled. It didn't matter what it was about, it just had to be something she cared about. But to engage in that way meant so much to her. And I brought the posters that I had gotten from your event and showed them to her, and it was like a light bulb went off for her. She
I
was
know.
just thrilled.
Well, I love that, right? Like you see these things, they cascade down. And I want to suggest to anyone is thinking that they're done after this, no, we are going to have an after hours where we're going to talk to some of these bright spots, including a surprise guest that we have that has agreed to join us. One of my favorite bright spots that we highlighted was my dear friend, Shamichael Hallman. So Shamichael is the Director of Civic Health and Workforce Development at the Urban Libraries Council. Shamichael, thank you so much for joining me. When I think about Civic Futures, I think about you and what you are doing for the over 2,600 libraries that you are supporting as beacons of strength and civic foundational connection and community connection in your communities. So Liz and I are so thrilled that you could join us tonight to talk a little bit about your work.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really honored that you would make the invitation.
Well, wonderful. I also want to congratulate you on a book that just came out appropriately during Voter Education Week called Meet Me at the Library, which is all about reimagining our libraries. Look at it, it's all dog-eared, Shamichael, and I've already read it and it's dog-eared. Talking about libraries and what they can do to uplift our communities. So just building on some themes today, talking about design, asking different questions of what might happen with these places that are so foundational to our history and our future, and then asking what else they could be for our community. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your work.
Yeah, so thanks a lot again for having me. The book the origins of that book really start with my time with the Memphis Public Library System. Starting in the end of 2016, began to have conversations with them about coming into a role that would be responsible for, in part, overseeing the renovation and reimagining of a historic branch that's located in downtown Memphis. And so I got to come alongside designers and architects and, really great stakeholders in the community to begin to sort of ask the question, what could this library be? How might we re-envision, reimagine this library to really sort of meet the needs of an evolving community, one that was growing in many different ways. And so we wanted to create a space that produced delight and inspiration, that encouraged community and participation, that fostered belonging and tolerance, that embraced debate and difference, different points of view. And we went about doing that in so many ways, from the design of the building to the programmatic elements to the staffing that we hired to just the ways that we went into the community and engaged. And that work became amazing. We were recognized by Smithsonian Magazine, who dubbed us the most innovative library in the country. The Institute of Museum and Library Service, which each year gives out a national medal to libraries and museums. It's the highest medal that honor you can get as a public library or museum. Our library actually got it twice, and we're the only library in the country that's received that award twice. And a lot of it was rooted in that work that we were doing to try to make this library not only just a repository for books, which is so important, right? That people have access to information, but also so many other things. And so in this library, as we begin to sort of imagine what it might be, we created a recording spaces so that you could record audio and video projects, right? And everything that you might need to be able to do that, whether it was a camera or a green screen or a microphone, that your library card would get you access to that. We added a performing arts space, and it was built on a mutual aid model. Many individuals in the community, arts organizations, said, hey, we really would be great for us to have a space that was inclusive and accessible and affordable, and that the availability of those spaces is limited. And so, okay, well, we think we can embed that in the library and say, hey, we won't necessarily charge you to come in and rehearse and perform. What we would ask you to do is to do community centered programming, right? And so people came in and did all sorts of really things, from hip hop dancing to podcasting and all sorts of amazing things. We added a chef. We added a cafe that really celebrated the best of seasonal and locally grown foods in the area. And when I would tell people this, Lisa, and I would say, man, like you got to see this, and they're like, huh, like what, like what? You're talking about a library? Why are you putting all of these things in the library? I say, no, just meet me at the library tomorrow. We'll have coffee. I'll show you what's happening. And when they would come, they'd be like, oh, I get it now. It makes sense now, right? And so that was where the book started. And of course, now my work at the Urban Libraries Council, we get to continue to do that work.
I have a question. What is the
Yes.
library not? You just described everything. Like, do you have a swimming pool? Do you have like what is not there? That's what I want to know. What do you not include?
Yeah, we don't have a swimming pool. It may be interesting though. I mean, public pools. I think there's an argument for public pools to come back in a really interesting way. But to answer your question, Liz, I think we got to that destination with not only a wonderful vision, kind of this, how might we create a new space, but really it was really engaging the community. And really I put this sign over the door that every time we would walk out of the library, we would ask ourselves, who's not coming in this door? Who's not coming in this building? Like, we know that we're serving some really amazing people, but we think we could do more. And as we started thinking about and really realizing who the people who were not coming in the library and engaging those folks, we started saying, oh, well, hey, these are highly creative folks who would love to be able to produce a podcast or produce an album. Memphis is music, right? Memphis is soul. So what if we added that for them and took that cost barrier away? What if we provided a space for them to be able to display and produce and show their art? And so, it was really sort of meeting the needs of the community that led to the design of the space in that way.
I love so much of this, again, imagination, Shamichael, that you are putting out, not just for Memphis, but now in your role at the Urban Libraries Council, and of course in the book about what we can do to rebuild our community, starting with the thing that we all, I think, have a personal connection to. So I think it is a beautiful example of what Liz was talking about around being a civic futurist, right? You were given something and you said, I'm imagining something different. And I know a big part that drives your work is really using a library as an opportunity to address the epidemic of loneliness, right? And again, I'll go back even to that futures wheel scenario that I talked about. I think there are very few people that would be like, libraries will fix loneliness. But I think by saying, like, by what could happen if we made libraries a place that served more people, that we made more welcoming, that we added more services, that we, continue to deliver, that we reminded ourselves about what we stand for and why, and our mission constantly to get more people there. That's what I think this is all about. I think it's teaching more people to think like that. And I can say, in now teaching hundreds, if not thousands of students, that the ability to imagine new futures and bring them to life is something we can all learn to do. One of the reasons, Liz, why I think you were like, what is this thing? And why is this thing? It's not because we're not capable. It's because we've never been taught. And if I said to you, and Michael, I know you work so much with teachers and youth, how many people have taken a history class? I think everyone would raise their hand, right? We know history, it's foundational, it's important, we got to learn it, it's patterns of the future, we have to understand where we came from. But if I said, how many people have taken a futures class? Like zero. And which one of those can we influence? So I think that is the importance of this work. And the way that I'm doing it through these civic imagination projects is to try to make it more accessible, to feel it first, and then unpack and say, well, wow, what else? Who else? How else? And Liz, I just want to say, I know one of the reasons why we wanted to come together, and we're going to talk a little bit more after hours, because we have another bright spot joining us. Don't miss. Chris Lose is joining us from I Dream Society. So Chris is going to be amazing, an award-winning broadcaster who is revolutionizing young people and how they think about their places and spaces. But following the Futures Happening, which was an experiment, having Shamichael there, thank you so much, and Liz, you there, talking about Design for America and so many other bright spots in our maker gallery that we made available, is that we started to get calls from people from that weren't there, right? And
Yep.
in interest. And the best was when I got a call from the First Lady of Albuquerque, who I didn't really know, and said she happened to also be in the Futures. So she knew a little bit. She got it. She said, how do we get the Futures happening to our city? And I was like, that was a good question.
Wow.
And so thanks to input from Shamichael and all these case studies, we did create the Futures Happening playbook that is freely available to help more people flex civic imagination in applied and integrated ways that honor their communities the way Shamichael does, and the way that, Shamichael, you're supporting libraries. And the last thing I wanna say about you for now, because you're going to continue with us in office hours, is that you brought together 100+ librarians on voter registration day to do kind of like what we're doing here today, right? To give them some ideas. And I wonder, maybe you could just share a minute or two about what that was like.
It was amazing. So much of the book was me calling library professionals and library directors saying, what are you doing? How are you stitching your community together? And so I sort of had a list already of, folks that I knew would want to be a part of Futures Happening. And so, we had a really amazing opportunity to put together a civic health summit for library professionals. And you said over 100 library professionals attended. And we talked about things such as the role of missing disinformation, and how we can handle that in libraries. We talked about the library being a place for civil discourse and dialogue. We talked about the library being a place for just community engagement. And so many really great things came out of that, Lisa. Hundreds now of folks have your playbook. So thank you for creating that and giving us space to talk about that.
Shamichael, I just had a crazy idea. You probably already thought about it. But what if you had a section of every library that was books get written, and you just had blank books or blank, I don't know what they were, but you invited the patrons to come in and write them.
That, like, Liz, as you said that, like, it was like a chill that kind of ran through my bones. So now I'm going to figure out how I can make that happen.
Okay, let me know. I'll help you. I'm
Yes.
excited, right? Because so much of the library is like, I'm thinking about this tension with the past and what Lisa was saying about, we all learn about history. So much, what is written is in the past, right? but what
Yeah.
has yet to be written, and how can we see ourselves as entering the library and being part of the authors of the future? Let's work on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, Liz, I love that provocation. And again, I want to go back to a question that you said about like, but we don't have time for this. And
Yeah,
what
right.
maybe I would, I know we're coming to an end here. I would say we don't have time not to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how I feel about it. We don't have time not to do it. And so we need everybody on this call to just start small, just to create a little place to remind us of what we're capable of, to remind us that we can both imagine the futures that we want, and then we can build it. And it often starts with, hey, I have an idea. Do you want to? I mean, so much of what I do is about conjuring up an idea and then figuring out how to get other people excited to say yes. And the reason why I do that is not because I have big budgets, I rarely do. It's because I have invested in the relationship to try to understand what would lift something for them. And, I think that's a great approach to try to build a more abundant future than one that feels like it is coming at us in a very negative and divisive way.
So Lisa and Shemichael, we're going to end very shortly, and I know some have to get off the call. What's something everybody on the call could do tonight or tomorrow morning, like something very concrete, that could change tomorrow?
Shemichael, you want to go first?
Lisa, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Well, of course, I mean, I have to say, what's the one concrete they can do? They can make sure that they have a plan to vote. I mean, the most obvious thing that is going to shape our future is, what is going to happen. And, I really hope that some of the methods and the processes that we talked about today, just help take down the tension a little bit I can't tell you how many people I hear where they're like, I know I have to vote, but I'm just so anxious about it, or I feel like an imposter.
Yeah.
And so, what I want to say is if you have a point of view about how you want the future to unfold, you are not an imposter. You have a chance to exercise your vote and your voice. And there is still, unfortunately, a lot of gobbledygook and unfortunately, even a lot of barriers. But there are also a lot of places that want to help you. So I really, really encourage people to, if they do one thing, to say, you know what, I have a chance here to flex and to participate. How am I going to do that? And if I don't know how am I going to get the help to do that?
Good. And if you need help, get a library card.
Go to the
Rethink
library.
your library.
Excuse me. Great conversation. Lively, lively, lively. No surprise. Sorry, something just hit my throat right when I unmuted myself. Sorry about that. Shemichael, thanks so much for showing up and being a surprise guest. And it sounds like we're going to have another surprise guest at After Hours as well. A surprise to fan, which is good. I can't wait. I like being surprised. After Hours is a little bit different for this. Anyone can come. We've been putting a link in chat over and over again. Just come hang out, just register, come join. You don't have to buy a book. You don't have to be a special anybody. Just come and hang out, ask your questions of these three very bright people and this mystery fourth person named Chris, I believe. Is that the name, Chris? Someone named Chris?
Yep, amazing.
I can't wait to meet Chris. Come hang out with us. It's about 7:59 right now, so we'll be starting. We're going to give everybody a 5-minute break before we open up the After Hours room. So we'll be opening up at 8:05. We'll finish at 9:00 p.m. Central. So 55 more minutes. Come bring, if you're a school teacher, if you're a school administrator, if you're a leader within your community, a nonprofit volunteer, nonprofit executive, whoever you might be in any organization, come learn some concrete strategies about how to motivate, how to implement, how to think forward, how to not just go home tonight and pull the blanket over your head when maybe part of your body wants to just pull the blanket over your head. You do not have to pull the blanket over your head. So thank you, Lisa, so much. We love hanging out with you. Liz, as always, thank you so much for yet another brilliant interview in Fanland. Shemichael, pleasure to meet you. Can't wait to hear some more at After Hours about your work. So far, I'm fascinated. So thanks everybody for joining. Those of you local to the Chicago area, Jason Reynolds tomorrow night. I mean, whoa. In person, on stage, he is actually committed to memory the first chapter of his new book, and he will be doing a dramatic recitation of the first chapter of his book on stage. And then he's doing a photo op with everybody afterwards, one at a time. So, I mean, come on, what's not to love? Thank you, everybody. We'll see hopefully some of you tomorrow night, and we'll see you at after hours in about 5 minutes. Thanks so much.